What is going on, everyone? Welcome into Bayou Bengals football. So LSU 49-39 victory over Missouri. Big win for the LSU Tigers. So huge victory. And I'll say this about this game. This was a game where, I'll be honest, a lot of people can say this. I really had a feeling they were going to win. This was a game where if LSU, I kind of reiterated this in the last episode, if LSU was going to do something special this season, this was a game that they had to win. Not only they had to win, but they had to win and improve where they needed to improve. They improved. They looked better defensively. I know 39 points is not ideal, what you want to give up, but they got some turnovers, got some stops. They did some things. They did a lot of the things that they needed to do to turn the corner. And, maybe this is just me being too optimistic, but LSU really, this was a game where the way they won this game, I think it gives you a sliver of hope that they could win out. I've always been like that. That's why I've always enjoyed college football, because even if you lose one game or you start off to a 5-0, 4-0, 6-0 start, you have a belief no matter who you are. If you win out, you can start to believe that you can go undefeated. So that's the thing. I think the immediate reaction to a lot of people is if a team loses a game or two games early, that they're going to lose. The de facto thing that comes to mind is you're going to lose again, but not necessarily. As bad as things are, things can change for the better. There was, I remember USC. If you remember USC in 2016, would they start 1-2? 2-3, 1-2, 2-3, some bad start. Sam Darnold came in. Ed Orgeron became was that when he became the interim head coach? But the point is, USC went on that tear, won the Rose Bowl. So there has been some turnarounds of teams who had, ugly starts. There's a lot of example. College football is tough because a lot of times, no team in the college football play era has lost two games and made the playoffs, but LSU has a chance to be that first team. So hopefully they can do that. It would be awesome to see them do that. I come from, I'll be honest, I kind of hate the people's opinions that if you lose two games, you should immediately be eliminated from the playoffs. It's just, LSU, they played Florida State week one. Florida State, that is a tough challenge for anyone. Florida State, even if Florida State doesn't do something special, even if they don't win the ACC and or win the national championship this year, Florida State, that's not, with the talent they have this year, even if Florida State was even if they, somehow was there only like a 7-8 win team this year, that is just not an opponent you want to play early in the season. Because Florida State, with the way they can recruit, being in the South, and with, as good a coach as Mike Norvell, even if you don't think Norvell's an elite coach, with as good a coach as he has established himself as, that is a tough opponent week one. And that is not that you should get a mulligan for, not that you should should be completely ignored for losing it, but, that's a game where you kind of get somewhat of a pass. That kind of, it is, LSU did not, LSU easily could have played, they played Grambling week two. They could have easily played an opponent like Grambling in week one. But yeah, it's too bad Deuce Chestnut not with the team right now. The secondary didn't look a whole lot better yesterday. I was hoping Zy Alexander would have made a few more plays. Awesome to see Harold Perkins get that interception. I think Whit Weeks still going through some growing pains. I think he'll continue to get better as the season goes on. Major Burns, awesome to see him get that pick six to seal the deal. But yeah, the defense, and Mason Smith did get a sack. Mason Smith, just really has not played as well as I think a lot of people had hoped. But it's kind of one of those things where you look at him and Harold Perkins, when the rest of the defense is performing at such a poor level, I think a lot of times that's when, elite difference makers can kind of be neutralized, just because, if there's all day to throw, if no one else is getting pressure, how effective, then the ball is probably just going to be thrown. Or if the secondary is allowing people to just get open right away, then, how effective, how effective can a pass rusher be? They almost have to be unblocked to get pressure at that point. But, LSU secondary, I was a lot bigger, more of a believer in than most. It appears I've been wrong that the secondary just, their secondary just is not good. If you had to put a label on where their secondary is performing in regards to the rest of the SEC, it's a very average to poor, probably at the bottom, maybe bottom 2, 3, 4 secondaries in the SEC conference. So just really not performing at a high enough level. But they are in the linebacker. You look at their linebackers kind of in a tough situation because Spates. I think the linebacking core doesn't get. I don't want to bash the linebacking core, but I don't think they have been held accountable as much because you look at. Greg Penn is a good player, but he's limited as far as movement skills are concerned. He's shown he can make plays. He's a solid tackler. He has the ability to take on blocks with strength, but he's just not Penn's just not a difference maker. Spates hasn't been that guy. So, and then Perkins not playing off the ball anymore. And then Whit Weeks, a talented guy, very good athlete, at least a good athlete, but he's, like I said, going through some growing pains. So, with all that being said, that really is the strong reason why the linebacking core has not performed to as high a level as most wanted. But yeah, if you're Brian Kelly, you should be happy about this win. And to ease some of the pressure on Brian Kelly, I kind of want to talk about Matt House for a minute. So. A lot of people, Brian Kelly, it's kind of funny how when Brian Kelly's teams perform poorly, it seems like he takes kind of the most of the brunt of that. But Matt House, why isn't it time that we should start maybe questioning Matt House? I know LSU, I credit Brian Kelly bringing in that consultant. I don't even know the guy's name. They showed the guy on the sideline with the bucket hat, the 82-year-old guy that's a consultant for their defense. So, appears that may have helped them a little bit this week, but I think we need to question maybe Matt House a little bit, because a lot of programs, the coordinator, when a team's struggling, especially with how bad the defense is performing, I think you need to question a little bit. Especially Matt House, his identity was we were gonna create takeaways on this defense. So, with the exception of this game, a little bit in the Florida State game, I think did they have a takeaway against Grambling? With the exception of 2-3 games, they have not turned the ball over and they have not gotten stops and they've allowed a lot of points. So really have done three incredibly poor, or three things you just do not want to do as a defense. And yeah, Matt House, as much as he was preaching in his press conference, creating takeaways, they just have not really done that. Well, they have done that, but they've just not have done that consistently and at a high enough level. So I think we got to question Matt House. If the defense, I'll say even if the defense just improves a little bit, I think, whether they choose to move on from him. Look, I don't really like to play that, get rid of the guy game, the firing game this point in the season. But maybe there could be a guy that's a better fit. Brian Kelly's already had to do that. You saw at Notre Dame, they had to kind of move on from some assistants, bring in some new guys. Remember that, they had hit a kind of a low point at Notre Dame. Maybe this makes you wonder, we'll say this, with thinking optimistically more so down the road. If LSU is to win it all here, you may wonder if if there is going to have to be some fairly extreme or fairly drastic measures taken to some of the assistant coaches. Whether that means moving on for Matt House, Denbrock, it appears his job is safe for certain, just sort of the way the offense is performing. But I honestly think that a lot of the offensive credit goes to Brian Kelly. I think Brian Kelly Brian Kelly more so an offensive-minded guy. Credit him to he was the one. He's the guy that's vouched for Jay Daniels to be the starter. He's the guy that's recruited several of the guys on the offensive line, including Emory Jones, Will Campbell, two of the staples on the offensive line. So credit where credit's due for Brian Kelly for the success of the offense this year. In an offense that, isn't as good as 2019. I think we'll answer that question now. I think a lot of people know the answer to that question, even though as much as they are enjoying the offense this year. No, it is not. But is there a lot of things that are similar? And could you argue that the offensive line is better? Actually, I don't even know if that's an argument. I'd say this offensive line is better. But is Jaden Daniels, Joe Burrow? No. Is the receiving core as strong? Even though could you argue Neighbors could end up being on par down the road of Jamar Chase in the NFL? Maybe, but are these receiving cores as comparable? Is this receiving core this year as good as the 2019 one? No. But there's similarities between both offenses, and both just have the capability to consistently put up points and create such a threat and put so much pressure on the defense. But yeah, that is the hope. If you're an LSU fan, the defense continues to grow and get better. Harold Perkins, you get the feel he's due for a dominant game coming up. Mason Smith is going to be due for a dominant game. You saw some flashes of those two guys. I think that's what's really key. And I don't know if the coaches did this or not, but I would really, during that week of practice, I really would have challenged Perkins and Mason Smith. I would have said, you know what, guys, we are, the linebacking core, the secondary, it has some struggles. We're going through some growing pains with some young guys, transfers. We need you guys can you make one play for us? Harold Perkins, interception. Mason Smith, sack. So check. So I think that was crucial. And those would be, sometimes to win a game, it's as simple as that. Put up a lot of points, make a few plays defensively. You see college football, how close some games are, how back and forth scoring is. And RG3 was announced at the game. He made the point. It's like with LSU, sometimes when a defense is really struggling, that can add even more pressure to an offense because they feel like they have to not only score each time they have the ball, but score a touchdown. So, I'm watching that game early on, and they get behind. Missouri had got a 2-point conversion, and that's where I was really getting very, very worried because it's like Missouri Missouri taking a lead, now they have that kind of the advantage with that 2-point conversion in the game. So it's 15-7, and you're like, yeah, LSU's not out of it, but their secondary's giving up big plays. Brady cooked the Missouri quarterback is in a rhythm. So then at that point, you're really wondering, is this, more of the same old? And is this are we heading to a surefire loss? And are we heading towards a season where we still had maybe a sliver of hope, and now that is just completely down the drain? So I think it's really cool that LSU, that might be, even if LSU doesn't win it all, if they really take control of this division in this conference, I think that Missouri game, 15-7, the way it read on that scoreboard and the way that game was trending, I think that probably is a moment you look back on and say that's when LSU took control of the season and really just kind of rode their momentum forward. But I always talk about if. I like to stay optimistic for the most part on this channel. I really believe, part of why I started, I was a believer in this LSU football team this year. I think even if they win the SEC and don't win it all or don't get in the playoff, I think that is a disappointment, and I think you could argue it as a failure because, I guess if you want to look at this negatively, just because LSU, I think, even though the question marks were in the secondary a little bit at running back, but even not as much at running back because you knew they had such depth, I think LSU, there was just so much certainty. Part of part of a lot of predicting how teams are going to do, at least the way I used to do it, maybe not as much so, but a lot of the way analysts predict how teams are going to do is they predict by how much certainty a team has. So what did we know for certain with LSU? We knew Brian Kelly's a good coach. Probably, you could say a very good coach. I don't know if you go as far as elite coach. Is he a top 5 coach? Probably not. Is he a top 10 coach in college football? Yes. Very good coach? Yes. You knew Jaden Daniels was an excellent quarterback. You knew this offensive line was going to be very good to elite, probably arguably elite at this level. You knew you had depth at the running back position. You knew you had at least one elite receiver. Now it appears to be maybe 2 elite receivers. And then you knew you had a defense who had at least two true difference makers. They still do have 2 true difference makers, and you knew they had a secondary. The only question mark really was a secondary, but they had got so many transfers in Isaiah Alexander and Andre Sam, where they kind of you felt like that was cleared up. And certain obviously the secondary is still a concern, or the secondary is still a troublesome issue, but there's just so much certainty. Year 2 of Brian Kelly, year 2 of a quarterback, a program that is recruiting at a high level. I think, LSU was, I guess the safe bet, if you will, because there was just so much certainty with this LSU team. But watching the documentary Swamp Kings, you really get an understanding of how hard how difficult it is to, number one, not only run the table, because Urban Meyer at Florida did not run the table in the years he won a national championship, but how hard it is to go through a season where you don't lose more than 1-2 SEC games. It is easy to lose 1 or 2 SEC games. LSU obviously, still just 1 SEC loss, but the other loss coming to Florida State, a team from the South who has the ability to recruit comparable to an SEC opponent. So LSU, tough. Even though it's just 1 SEC conference loss, 2 losses already at this point. Obviously, they were two pretty good opponents, but it's just one of those things where the grind of the SEC. It's like LSU. That's the thing. LSU lose that heartbreaking loss to Ole Miss, and you're thinking, oh wait, maybe next week's easy. Missouri's not good. Oh wait, they're 5-0. It's on the road. That's just that is the grind of the SEC, especially years when the SEC is good. And that's what's funny. The SEC, some teams are a pleasant surprise. Who would have thought last year Tennessee was going to upset Alabama? Tennessee really had just Tennessee, a program longing for their success the 90s with Peyton Manning and some of the other, some of the more notable guys in Tennessee football. And then Tennessee, all they do is beat Alabama, win 11 games, win the Orange Bowl. The SEC, it seems like there's always a pleasant surprise team, or not always, but a lot of times. And then look at here comes Arkansas out of nowhere with Sam Pittman, and then Missouri. I know LSU beat Missouri, but under Drinkowitz and Cook, the quarterback, and some of the transfers, Theo Weiss, Missouri's quietly doing some nice things this year, and they're still, even with that loss, 5-1, and they're still very much in the mix of the SEC East Division. So to the point, it is a grind in the SEC, and it's you can drop a game and you think, hey, we can relax a little bit. No, you can't. You got a quality opponent coming up once again. But yeah, I think LSU they really need to obviously win out, but they really need to you hope that. I like what Jaden Daniels said. The offense just cannot get satisfied. That is the ultimate, should be the ultimate goal for this offense to, do not, if your defense starts making some plays, do not get comfortable knowing that they're going to be stops. I think as an offense, I think their defense is really teaching this offense a lesson any offense should know, is that your mindset should be to to score touchdowns on every possession. I know I sound like Captain Obvious, but you should not just be, let's just go out, move the ball, get some first downs. When we're, especially if we know our defense is struggling, we know we got to put the ball in the end zone almost every drive, if preferably every drive. And I know obviously that is sounds like the simplest dumbed down answer to win a football game, but that is when your defense is struggling that badly, your offense has to think in that sort of a manner, and you have to think, that is that can be, that is how we can win some games. I guess the old saying, defense wins championships, but for LSU, they, with an offense this superior, a lot of times you can throw out that a little bit. But what the worry is, as much as Jaden Daniels says, the offense is, I guess, to kind of counter that point I made, the offense, can be good enough to score every, the offense most likely is going to have a really down game. And that's the game where you hope your defense is playing at least somewhat well, because in a game like that, that's when that's what can lead to you getting blown out, or you just losing 21-3 or 14-3, and it's ugly. Those are the games you really want to avoid. So, I guess to sum up the point, LSU needs to be thinking touchdown every drive. They need to score touchdowns early and often. Harold Perkins, Perkins needs to just be that dude. I don't think he's a guy that's going to get satisfied, but he's a guy that LSU and this coaching staff going to have to continue to challenge him to perform at a high level. He is the man defensively, a guy that certainly can rush the passer. And, Mason Smith, it makes you wonder how much is he still hopefully he's fully recovered from that injury. He still does not look quite like his old self, but as the season goes on, he'll start to look more and more like the Mason Smith of old. I remember a few, in the summer he was dealing, in fall camp he was dealing with some injuries that were kind of extra cautious with him. So maybe he's dealing with some other kind of lingering injuries. Greg Brooks going through. Greg Brooks, the tumor removed from his brain. So hopefully, they can get Greg Brooks back out there. Greg Brooks, a talented safety too. Andre Sam's been okay, but he's not really performed at a consistent level for him. And I think, no one really talks about this. I guess I don't really listen to kind of what other people are saying about LSU as much because I have my own channel. But, no one really makes the point, or no one really talks about how, if you watched LSU's tape last year, Jay Ward made a lot of tackles for LSU. And it's kind of funny. I'm listening to Brian Kelly talk about, our defense lost some key guys, Bernard Converse, B.J. Ozolari, guys from last year. And those are all good players, don't get me wrong, but Jay Ward was just making a lot of tackles for this team. And you could say, well, he was making tackles after a guy gained 5 yards, they got a first down. But sometimes in football, just making tackles, if you have a guy just making a lot of tackles, it's that is a lot more valuable than you initially think. Because if you don't have one guy that is a sure tackler, not that LSU doesn't this year, but if you don't have a guy in the secondary, like I'd say LSU this year, like I say, I guess this is how I can back up my point. Like Andre Sam's a pretty good tackler, Major Burns a pretty good tackler, Alexander okay tackler. None of those guys have been. No guy in the LSU secondary is a sure tackler. Maybe Greg Brooks. Maybe that's why LSU is really missing Greg Brooks. Maybe you could argue Greg Brooks is a sure tackler. But with Greg Brooks out, no Jay Ward this year, LSU does not really have a sure tackler. So you got to think, the Ole Miss game, LaTerrence Welsh, not to pick on LaTerrence Welsh, but he gives up a big play. I think it was a touchdown. And on a play like that, he was close to the guy, but just a mix of poor effort, maybe limited change of direction stuff. Couldn't tackle him. It leads to a big play touchdown. And I'm thinking, if this is last year, Jay Ward always around the ball. If he makes a tackle, does that drive result in a field goal? Now, you can't say that because Jay Ward's not here, but the point I'm trying to make is, when you don't have a sure tackler in the secondary, it's easy to give up yards. I think that, that's why Devin White was so heavily coveted, and it's perfect. That's a perfect example because, Devin White played at LSU a few years back, obviously. But Devin White, was so valuable to the LSU defense just because, even though he was not the best tackler, just his burst ability to run sideline to sideline and strong enough to just wrap people up, slow people down. If you're just making tackles and you can run people, you have one or two guys that can run people down and slow them down, prevent big plays, prevent big play touchdowns. The amount of yards that saves over a course of a season, because everyone talks about football as a game of inches. One guy doing that and saving that much yardage throughout the course of a season really adds up. And when you're in a close game, a guy like that saving a few yards or saving a big play, that can be the difference. Because that's the thing. If LSU has one sure tackler in the secondary, like if Greg Brooks plays against Ole Miss, does LSU win that game? Maybe they don't. But also, you got to believe, maybe, they probably do. They definitely have a better chance. So, that's the point. LSU, I think they are lacking a sure tackler in the secondary. But all right, I'm going to wrap with that, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Bayou Bengals. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.